Welcome to Grants in IPOG. This is one of an IPOG series designed to help nonprofits. The content in this video comes from a webinar hosted by the Stewards of Alberta's Protected Areas of Alberta, or SAPA. The webinar was possible by the contributions from volunteer presenters, panelists, and moderators. It also benefited from a very knowledgeable audience. Thank you to these individuals. IPOG stands for Inputs, Processes, Outputs, Outcomes, and Governance. It is a way for nonprofits to think about their organization. It is a tool to help a nonprofit board focus in on one area at a time. For example, grants. While grants are a type of input, they also rely on the rest of the IPOG. Volunteers work on the project funded by the grant. Accounting and reporting processes support the outputs and outcomes. Staff, volunteers, and the board manage the grant project as part of governance. The grant management lifecycle helps organizations understand what it takes to successfully apply for and manage a grant. It is broken into 5 steps. The first 4 follow a chronological sequence, while the last, governance administration, supports the first 4 phases. Speaking of phases, every grant starts with a single application. The board has a role in determining what type of grants to apply for. Staff or volunteers complete and submit the application. Every unsuccessful grant application should be debriefed with the funder. A successful application results in a contract with the funder, which is part of the award. Once the check has been deposited, you can get to work. If there are challenges with the delivery, talk to the funder as soon as possible. Also, don't delay in starting to write the final report. The project or operations have been delivered, but you're not done yet. Most grant organizations require a final report as well as updates. Don't forget to do an internal debrief to know what to do or not do next time. Spanning the first 4 phases is governance and administration. The board needs to communicate the role grants play in the organization. They also need to understand that they are accountable for the entire grant process. Administrative functions include accounting, volunteer management, staffing, or procurement. These are examples of operational capacity. The purpose of a lifecycle model is to help an organization see the big picture and zoom in on specific details. Look for the lifecycle throughout the rest of the video to provide context to the panelists and presenters. We will hear from them in a moment, but let's first hear about the moderator of this.
Well, welcome to the second Community of Practice for Organizational Stewards. You are here today because you and an organization you are affiliated with want to make a difference in Alberta's protected areas. But to begin, who am I? Well, my name is Hans. I'm a film producer in Vancouver, so I rely on grants quite heavily for film productions. But while today's focus is on environmental grants, much of what we will discuss is relevant in other contexts, such as for the arts. For more than 25 years, SAPA has supported stewards in Alberta. Over the past 3 years, SAPA has taken on functions formerly fulfilled by the province. On the screen is SAPA's Vision Star. At the center are protected areas. Cardinal points include ensuring proper usage, supporting stewards, monitoring and reporting the state of the areas, and education. In addition to the esteemed panel and presenters, tonight's audience has considerable experience in the grant lifecycle. This is a community of practice. Feel free to share your experiences, challenges, and ideas with your peer organizations. A little over 1/3 of the audience rates itself as a neophyte, or having some knowledge of grant management. That means the majority of those attending are grant experts. I'm quite looking forward to hearing and learning a lot from you. Most attendees use manual or have no established grant management process. Absent for the list are any attendees using grant management software. And this is a good segue to Tyler, as he worked with a student group who evaluated the use of technology in grant management. Tyler, tell us about your recent experience with this student group.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Hans. Before I dive in too deep, I'll just do a brief intro about myself. My name is Tyler Norris, and I serve on the SAPA board. and I will be talking a bit about the current grant landscape for environmental nonprofits. So a bit about me is I just did graduate from the University of Alberta, which is where I was first introduced to SAPA. I have a major in marketing and a minor in business economics and law, and I currently work in marketing for BrokerLink Insurance. Let's start with specifying what the core of what SAPA does, and that is a site visit. As I'm sure many of you know, site visits are the central part of what we do at SAPA. It provides on-the-ground information about the state of a site, but who actually goes out and conducts these inspections? A site inspector may be a SAPA volunteer, a nearby resident, a member of the public, or a peer organization, such as tonight's wonderful attendees. So the problem we face is since 2017, according to OHS, volunteers are considered unpaid employees. This means that SAPA must have a safety program in place. And the problem with this requirement is that often a single individual is traveling hundreds of kilometers to go into a protected area with no cell phone reception. So at SAPA, we worked with some students from Grant MacEwan University last summer to determine what maybe the cost of a safety program would look like. The most optimistic scenario we found was about 20 volunteers visiting 10 to 20 sites each year, producing 200 to 400 inspections reports annually. A more likely scenario is 7 to 12 volunteers visiting maybe 5 to 20 sites a year. And ideally, these volunteers are visiting and recruiting nearby residents to take oversight inspections in the future to hopefully create a self-sustaining site inspection system. However, to find the nearby resident, you need to send a volunteer out in the first place. So there are many variables, and we found the cost estimate to be between $25,000 and $75,000 a year. We can squabble over what the details would be, but the reality is sending a volunteer out to visit a remote area is a risky activity and would cost us some money. To put the viability of a funding program to the test, we commissioned yet another student group to do our analysis of the current grant landscape. This time, 2 students from Ontario universities, and we posed the question, are there grants out there for organizations like SAPA to access? If so, how may we find them? What do they require? And are they worth our time to apply? Based on our previous findings, we set the bar at about $60,000 to ensure financial viability. The students did come back to us with a couple options. They identified a few key grants that SAPA could pursue. The main one being the Alberta Public Land Trails Grant. They provide $1 million annually for the purpose of trail maintenance, safe recreation, and the preservation of public land. Aligns very, very well with what SAPA does. Also, there was the Habitat Stewardship Program for species at risk. They provide about $100,000 annually for the purpose of preventing the further decline of endangered species, and also the Alberta Eco Trust Foundation, which we will hear a bit more from after myself here. They also found various grant identification or management softwares. GrantStation is a great low-cost tool, but it's about $250 a year. Instrumental is much more powerful. It is AI powered, but that costs about $250 a month. And Open Grants, which is kind of the one they found as the best tool. It is more all-in-one, and it's about $350 a year. The other thing these students did suggest to us is setting up Google Alerts. Which is when you receive notifications when new content with certain keywords are listed. So if you have an alert set up for Alberta environmental grants, you'll be notified when new things are listed. So these do have various benefits. They do have some drawbacks. As I mentioned, cost is a big one, especially in the case of SAPA and others where we're dealing with nonprofits who may not have the money to fund the cost of these systems. And applicability was another. So there are not many Canadian-only tools. We found that a lot of the results were pulling up Canadian and American options. So this is adding an extra step of labor that these tools are supposed to remove, and labor is one of the biggest things that are spread thin across a lot of nonprofits. While grants are out there, in some cases, maybe the worst they can say is yes. What I mean by this is the added responsibilities that come with a grant. So let's go back to the Government of Alberta's Public Land Trails Grant. They require a detailed budget of how funds will be allocated, qualitative metrics to track success, a deliverables timeline, and a comprehensive communication schedules. While these are all very fair things to ask for in terms of a grant, the added responsibilities that come from grants to nonprofits can be quite overwhelming and can sink us. So as a result of these students' findings, SAPA decided to pivot. Instead of focusing on creating just a brand new program, we will be focusing on our time and resources on improving and polishing what we already do. Partnering with peer organizations like local community nature groups at low to no cost, we will find people who are already in these natural areas and show them who SAPA is, what we do, and how by filling out a site inspection form, they are helping preserve the land that they care about. By doing so, we will be improving and strengthening our organizational capacity without having to utilize grants for now. So now I pivot to you. Let me ask, do you agree with our decision to pivot? Do you think there are more we could have found out there in the grant landscape? Feel free to discuss at the end of the presentation as well, but thank you very much for your time.
We're going to be moving into our next speaker, Carolina. So Carolina, if you could please introduce yourself and welcome to the chat.
Yeah, thanks, Hans. And thanks everyone for being here. I really appreciate it. So my name is Carolina Nair Mercado. I'm the program coordinator with Alberta Eco Trust Foundation with our grants and initiatives team. I've been in the role for about a year and a half-ish now. So it's been a blast, getting to know the ecosystem and grant programs in general. But I'll just be talking a little bit about grants from the funder side today. I talked a little bit about myself, but who we are essentially is Alberta Eco Trust Foundation. We are a charitable organization that advances environmental and climate solutions across Alberta, and we collaborate with diverse partners from government, industry, nonprofits, and Indigenous communities to create a future where both people and nature thrive. We are also a founding member of Low Carbon Cities Canada Network, or LC3, which is a national initiative to accelerate equitable climate solutions in cities. I can tell you that we offer a suite of programs, grants, investments, and strategic engagement initiatives. I'm happy to answer questions on all of these, but today we'll just be focusing on our grants, and it's where we support nonprofit organizations and advance Alberta's environment and climate efforts through grant funding and project support. And we have 3 focus areas. We have our climate resilience and emissions reduction, nature-based solutions and conservation, and circular economy focus areas. These focus areas shape these grants. Our Climate Innovation Fund grant provides funding for emissions reduction projects in Calgary and Edmonton alone. It covers a diverse range of projects, and its focus areas are more specific in buildings and retrofitting, in low carbon mobility, decarbonization and renewable energy, and addressing barriers and opportunities. It offers up to $100,000 per project. The Environmental Impact Grant provides funding for projects across Alberta that deliver climate resilience and emissions reductions for the nature-based solutions and conservation, or advance circular economy, or even overarching. And it's $50,000 per project. And lastly, our Springboard grant is to fund capacity building projects for nonprofits, enhancing their ability to achieve impactful environmental outcomes. And they're $10,000 per project. Our bigger grants go through our 2-step application process, which the first step is an expression of interest that is screened for eligibility, and the second is a full application, and it gets reviewed by their respective executive advisory committee, which Holly in attendance have for our environmental impact grant. These members are folks involved in nonprofits, industry, for specifically government, and they're meant to encompass as much of the Alberta ecosystem and its perspectives as possible, not just left to Alberta Eco Trust staff to determine what best grant to pick. For our Springboard grant, our smaller one, last year we actually began using a randomized selection process where applicants submit an application and it is screened for basic eligibility, no worries, and they're entered into a randomized selection pool. So then this is meant to reduce biases and provide equal opportunity for all eligible applicants just due to the number of submissions that we get each year. Best practices and areas for improvement, a little bit of these are on the nose, and the majority of you are familiar with grant writing, so it might seem like repetitive and sort of obvious, but there's still common pitfalls for even the most expert of applicants. So if there's capacity and opportunity, because we realize not every funder offers this, a huge recommendation is chatting directly with staff. That's something that we offer at Alberta EcoTrust. You can chat with a program specialist for our 2 bigger grants, and this can really help us understand your proposal, and we can give feedback on the best fit for grant program, focus area, challenge statement, potential application weaknesses. And these conversations also allow us to provide feedback on your written material, so actual read through whatever you're thinking of submitting, and in some cases have allowed us to answer questions on your application during the decision-making process. So those staff isn't up to the decision making, we're able to answer some questions that committees may have. I'll talk about it more later, but the conversations are also a stepping stone for meaningful funder-applicant relationships, and we value these very much as we navigate the landscape. We also recommend reading shared resources on the grants website. So these offer answer a lot of questions folks already have working on their applications. We update them every year, but if you ever see anything missing, please let me know. Most notably, I want to point out that Alberta EcoTrust has the application scorecard publicly available for each grant. And this isn't just for staff screening EOIs, again, but it is a tool for our committees to maybe use and consider during the selection process. And for other funders that might not have their application scorecard up, it can look like a priority list of items, or maybe going over the overall program and organizational objectives. That's where the organization is sort of heading. Another recommendation is to have a well-developed project idea and scale pathway in mind. We do welcome those initial conversations where it's sort of like brainstorming. Initiatives that consider like all aspects and project needs, even beyond the scope of the grant timeline, are more favorable. For our programs that have longer application timelines, so as I mentioned, the two bigger ones have sort of the EOI and the full application, so longer timelines. We understand wanting to secure funding before like you break ground on a project or have a solid idea, but we also want to see a sort of commitment from the organization or any mentioned partners that you might have in mind. This is just because we want to provide funding, we want to give out money, but if projects are unable to complete or even start the work that they're applying for, then it means losing out on providing that funding for the year. And so some of those are the recommendations and the areas to look out for and how to improve them, but some essentially don'ts are to follow. I'm not saying these will be why your application gets rejected, since it's a whole convoluted process as we've already discussed, but we have found that they don't make for a very strong case if you have them. For one, it's forcing information or details in just to fit the criteria. Don't get me wrong, you should definitely speak to all aspects of as best as possible of the application. Tyler even mentioned that the best that can happen is yes. We would rather you know a potential weakness in your project or your organization, how you'll work to address it in this project or in the future, and how you use it as a learning opportunity better than anything, rather than sort of forcing something in. And another one is submitting an application mainly written by AI. We know it's increasingly becoming more and more a tool for accessibility and capacity, but an application mainly or all written by AI can leave questions of capacity or interest, so just something to look out for. We ourselves and other funders provide accommodations for submissions, such as like extensions on timelines, translated documents, one-on-one calls. So if you're ever curious, let us know. Lastly, the organization or application sometimes genuinely just isn't eligible for our specific programs, either in the organization itself or in the activities proposed. We're more than happy to provide like additional resources or alternatives for your idea, but sometimes it's not a good fit or just not eligible, unfortunately. And that was a lot, but I will answer questions if you have any. Our program approach is that throughout the lifespan of our grants, including the application process, we follow trust-based philanthropy. So this addresses the inherent power imbalances between funders, nonprofits, and communities, and it's based on 6 principles on the slide. Each build and demonstrate like a trust-based culture that opens up decision-making and information sharing structures. We've already made some changes in our organization and our grant programs to take these principles on, such as reducing the reporting frequency of our progress reports from quarterly to biannual or revising our programs annually. We're also always willing to listen to any feedback. Of course, in order to be successful in fostering a trust-based culture, we need a consistent line of communication from the grantees or the applicants. Before, during, or after a grant is completed, communication with the grantees is crucial. It helps us understand the ecosystem better and barriers better. It helps us learn when we may need to offer more support as funders and learn what resources we can offer to scale impact. Our supported projects have timelines between 1 to 2 years once you receive funding. Maintaining communication becomes a large priority and investment into our work. We really want to make sure that you're feeling supported and that we're doing everything we can to have a successful project. A little bit about the current and future landscape that us funders are doing. So I did touch on, what you can do to have a good application, et cetera. And we all understand sort of the landscape that nonprofits are working in, but just so you further understand the landscape that funders are trying to work on and navigate. And this is based on feedback that we have felt and that we have had in other conversations with other funders, but you'll later in the panel see how, or we'll be able to ask more questions to other funders. Private donations and public funding, to no surprise, for environmental initiatives are very low. And so we have to link environmental and climate work to the topics that are currently on the top of the political and social agendas, such as affordability. For funders, this means needing to evolve quickly. So flexibility, frontline leadership, and breaking down collaboration barriers are key. For us, it might look like taking a bit more risk, turning to lead innovation, discussing emerging trends, or working more directly with partners. What that looks like working with our grantees is ensuring the initiatives we support are creating meaningful and immeasurable environmental outcomes. Alberta EcoTrust takes on a variety of tools, such as previously mentioned philosophy of trust-based philanthropy, but more generally, we also use the monitoring, evaluation, reporting, and learning framework. And so by adopting these, it provides grantees the opportunity to showcase a variety of outcomes, so like able to use JAG measurements, gears of change, storytelling materials, etc., and for us to actually give space and learn from these. And under the evolving role of philanthropy and aligning the work with environmental impacts, I've already mentioned working with partners and breaking down collaboration barriers, but a big component of that is cross-sector collaboration. So for both grantees and funders, it becomes a leveraging opportunity for new initiatives, perspectives, and scales of impact. We do value how much time, energy, and resources are required to create meaningful relationships, and know that particularly developing that applicant/funder relationship can be difficult when working across sectors. So beyond the recommendations I've already provided, my last one is exploring opportunities for collaboration beyond funding. For example, one opportunity that Alberta EcoTrust welcomes is grant incubation with organizations. So this strategic approach to grants could include working with an applicant to co-design the scope of work, and at times, when possible, have Alberta EcoTrust participate in the project with an advisory or co-delivery capacity. We strongly believe in the power of grants, not only because of the environmental impact they can have, but because it allows us to build on these relationships, learn new avenues for the future, and result in a more significant outcome. Our contacts, but thank you all so much for listening.
I'm a musician. I'm also the director of Flying Canoe Volant and the cultural manager at Cité Francophone. So in all of those roles, especially in the latter two, grants are critical to our functioning at points with the Flying Canoe Volant, our survival. And I'm passionate about music, creativity, connecting people to each other through either concerts, music, productions, festivals, cultural opportunities, and that's what I do a lot of. And as I mentioned, grants are a big part of that. And I wrote my first grant when I was 25, Canada Council. I got my latest grant from Canada Council when I was 63, so 2 times lucky. And the rest of the time, I've been with La Cité Francophone now for 8 or 9 years. I've written grants for festivals, music festivals prior to that, but a large part of my job is this. And at first, I was a little trepidatious about the whole process, but have found that people like Carolina, Melissa, other grant officers are really very helpful, very kind, very insightful, and really their job is to give you the money and they want to help you get it to carry on your good work. Once I realized that it's not adversarial at all, it's positive and contributing to all of our societies in many ways, right? That it's been a nice process once you get over the initial, oh my God, what is this? And I find the measurables, the objectives, all of that thing that Tyler mentioned earlier, I find them not that daunting once you get used to it and once they're well defined and in context of what you really want to do. And I think that's the important thing. Know what you're about, know what you're doing, why you want to do it. There are opportunities out there. So yeah, I'm passionate about that. I still perform a lot of concerts every year around everywhere, and those are all big passions.
In my career as a research manager at the University of Alberta, I was involved in writing many research grants, which are very different from the grants that I write for charity at the moment. I find it interesting and in many ways quite a bit of fun to write a grant where there's a social aspect. I find it not very difficult to write a grant to foundations and different charities to get some money. And I have been rather successful. You know, these things are not very sexy, and I know that there are some granting agencies out there who want to have a big bang for their buck, and they want to come with a camera, have it on their webpage, and have a media thing. I usually stay away from those kind of grant agencies. The important thing to me about writing the grant is doing the research. I need to make sure that the agency that's offering the funding is aligned with what we want to get from them, outline what I need to do to be successful. When you want money for people who are hungry and living in poverty, it's not that difficult. But there are a lot of these grants are online grants. You don't just grab a piece of paper, start writing. You answer the questions based on their application process that is online. Find that first you do the research, you determine, yes, these people are aligned with what we want from them. I make sure that we have everything in place. If they need a budget, if they need the references, if they need a account with CRA, all of that. If we don't have any of that, then I don't bother that. I'll just conclude with one thing. I attended a seminar, an online seminar from a community initiatives project-based grants with Alberta Culture. And I was amazed to find out that only 1/3 of the grants are successful. And the reason for that is that 95% of the applications are incomplete. I try very hard to pay tremendous attention to detail and to make sure that all the requirements are there. And if they give you a small box to write the response to their question in an online application, I make absolutely certain that you answer the question very precisely. I would highly recommend this nonprofit grant writing 101. It's excellent, and I learned so much from them. And that was my initial bath in learning how to do this. And I found it extremely helpful, and it gives you encouragement, and you think, well, I can do this. The Align Association of Community Services, that lists a ton of different agencies, pages and pages of opportunities for Southern Alberta, Central Alberta, Northern Alberta, it's all over.
Next panelist, Holly. Holly, you have a foot in both worlds of grants, the application and the agency. So I'd like to start with the question, what are you passionate about? And then how has a foot in both helped you?
Thanks so much. Very glad to be here. So I am passionate about conserving the natural world around us for all the living beings that are here, humans and animals and plants. Kind of my background, I am a biologist by training. I'm a professional biologist. I'm wearing several different hats. I work for the Mistaki Institute, which is a nonprofit charitable applied environmental research institute. We're affiliated with Mount Royal University in Calgary, and our research really focuses in on supporting and promoting good land use decisions that support landscape health. I also wear, as you said, a foot in two worlds. I wear an Alberta EcoTrust hat as well. So Carolina mentioned Environmental Impact Grant. So I actually sit on a selection committee who reviews some of those applications that come in, and we decide as a committee who gets funded. It's a very challenging but really rewarding experience too. So from a grant side, on the Mistaki side, we have been recipient to grants from Alberta EcoTrust Foundation for years now, and I have experience on the writing side, the management side. What does it take to actually manage these grants once you get them? And then also from the other perspective too, I'm looking to see all these different applications, what makes a strong application, what makes a weak application, how other committee members look at it. So it's really been interesting, well, one, learning about the breadth of work in Alberta when it comes to the environmental sector, but two, it's really rewarding to see these different applications come through and kind of like learn what is successful from the grant making side, from that other side. I've been in Mistaki for about 10 years, and I've been on the advisory committee for EcoTrust for about 3 or 4 years now. Third hat that I'm wearing today is the Alberta Citizen Science Community of Practice. We've recently just launched a hub for that community of practice where we host different events and resources. Some of our resources are very specific to what it takes to running different environmental projects and specific to funding and granting. So I encourage you to check out the resources on the hub, and then feel free to join the directory. And on the directory too, there's a set of skills that you can list. And there are a lot of people that have experience on how to start some of these projects, and they would have experience on granting. So you can reach out to those people and kind of like build your network from there.
Like Carolina, you come from the funders world. So what are you passionate about? And tell us, what makes a good grant?
Great, thank you so much. Yes, I'm passionate about growing food, gardening, and connecting to nature in a life. Before working at Edmonton Community Foundation, I worked a lot in sustainable food and agriculture, mostly around community-based food systems. I'm also a board member on the Sustainable Food Edmonton, so I do see also both sides of the grant world, as well as working from the charitable lens of applying for funding. What helps make a grant successful, or what is the secret sauce? Eligibility and fit, really reading the guidelines. I would say about 10% of applications we see just aren't eligible once they're submitted and are withdrawn just by submissives. One thing, of course, it takes a lot of time, we recognize, to apply for grants, but do everything you can to avoid the last minute crunch. There can be times where an online portal might time you out. You could have content lost. And to help with that, we recommend working offline in a Word document. So just some little technical things, since so many of the people already have spoken of those really great big picture, connecting with the funder, asking for feedback, learning, and really doing it again.
How do you know when an application was clearly written by AI?
There's just a two-phase answer, I guess. One is that we're still learning kind of what that looks like, right? We're still learning how to distinguish between written application that is fully AI and like one that is human. It's still in that phase where it's sort of hard to tell, but there is some ways to tell, and that has been recommended. You know, the punctuation, the wording, grammar, all those things kind of can give a red light. But the second portion is that a lot of the people that take a look at the application, like committees and staff that we screen for eligibility, these folks have been working on looking at applications for a long time now and through various aspects. So we have staff that have worked in government grants, staff that have worked writing grants, and they can also kind of tell, you know, when a question is answered very directly. So I could, if it was me answering this question through AI, it could also be like, well, an application is written through AI because of it. So it's half we're still learning, half is sort of obvious, if that at all makes sense. It's kind of a combination of both. For the most part, we're still using trust-based philanthropy as a big component, that we trust that you put your time into this. We trust that you put thought into it. And again, AI being a tool for capacity and accessibility is still a big thing, and we certainly hope that you're able to add in your writing.
AI is just going to become more and more part of grants, and as we train the AI bots, they're going to become better and better, and I think that's a good thing. It's positive.
I'll jump in. I think Anne-Marie and I showed our generational differences in the chat box. No, I certainly appreciate it. I've never used it, but I do see how when I'm looking at some of the chats, summaries, get the ideas going. I can see absolutely the value in that. Word counts, I just, use a word count thing. Somebody mentioned word counts. But my experience, and Melissa touched on it, is that the narrative is critical. We all know that, right? Getting your story across, I think that's one of the major points of any kind of grant, writing the narrative, right? I will start to use it. I'd see the value in especially getting the creative juices flowing and maybe getting some of those ideas out that may not necessarily come out in a timely fashion. We're all under so many deadlines and we wear so many hats.
I'm excited for you guys to explore this because I love AI in certain contexts. I see the value in really helping it, not like, I guess with the summaries, but even just like wording changes a little bit. And I've seen it on both sides. I'm a biologist by training. I sometimes struggle with the narrative. So trying to make something more engaging for someone to read is something that AI could help me with a little bit more. It's not one of my strengths. And I see from an application side, I see the value of having that narrative. And we sometimes I know over the years, have had this debate with EcoTrust sitting on the committee, how important is a well-written grant versus just looking at like the milestones, because we have ones that come in that it's like, well, it's a great project idea, it hits all the milestones, but maybe it's not telling the narrative as we wanted, or it can kind of enhance some of those applications in those ways. And I also use it sometimes to get the juices flowing too. If there's a question that's like really out there, some of these applications, where do I even get started? And so I kind of see it as a conversation with AI, especially like if I'm writing this grant, my coworkers aren't around for me to bounce ideas off, then it's, hey, you can kind of throw an idea out there or you ask it a question and then it comes back and I'm like, no, that's a terrible idea. I would never put that in a grant. You can kind of test a few things without relying on it heavily.
If I can comment, what I find handy with AI is being a Francophone, my English may not be quite as precise as it should be to explain something. Then you use the AI, it provides me with a different way of saying something, and I can go, oh, that's what I really meant. There's an advantage there, second language.
Yeah, I really like that piece around the conversation with that AI, because we also see that when grantees will call us up to have a conversation and they're going through their ideas, and we can provide some of that guidance and coaching. If you're using AI to do some of that support, versus where I see the challenge is if the idea is not formed and then you use AI to start adding more words and helping to build an idea or a narrative or initiative that's not quite there, then that's where it will be a lot of words, but it will still feel quite hollow.
What makes a project really grant ready?
When I have a project idea mulling around in my head and I'm kind of looking, how can I fund this idea? I want to make sure I have a really clear project goal. What is the ultimate thing I'm trying to achieve? I want to have detailed milestones. How am I going to get to that goal? What's the timeline of those milestones? And then what are the deliverables to get me there, to reach each of those milestones? Is it a new software system that you're rolling out? Things like that. Do you have staff that could take this on? Are you needing to hire staff? Is it volunteers? And then on my list of things, have you met with the grantors to test the idea with them? So the funders, because I do, from our experience, there's a lot of value in talking to the funders before you even apply for a project, whether it's just to go back and forth with that conversation on eligibility or to see if it is truly a good fit and if you should spend your time on that.
If you feel strongly that your proposal is well aligned with the funder, then your success rate's actually rather higher than if not. I think it's important to do the research there, where you go to their websites and look at the grants that they have previously funded. Then you can get kind of idea, oh yeah, then my proposal will really suit them. I like to respond to a question, not necessarily that they have, but in my mind, what's in it for them? What kind of exposure are we going to give the funder if they give us the grant? How are we going to highlight them? And I always say, well, we publish annual report. We will have your logo in the annual report. We'll acknowledge your contribution there.
We find, if we have a project, like Anne-Marie mentioned, we find those funders that may align with our project. And because we're cultural and arts and festivals and events, those are pretty straight ahead. But I'm also responsible for all the corporate and business development part, right? So it's all the sponsorship and corporate. And that's really another level of prospecting where you're really digging deep and you're looking into those companies. You have to go through all the websites and find what other entities or events or festivals or projects they fund and see where those alignments are and find out where those commonalities are, common narratives, common wording, common social connections are, and go from there. It can be a lot of work, but it's really well worth it. And prospecting, whether it's through foundations, government grants, or corporates, is really a big part of it. And it's those alignments that really make or break it, I find.
What are the best practices for accounting and reporting on your grant? I'd like to hear from both sides here, both the grant givers and the grant receivers.
As soon as I get the money, then I start and tell everybody they absolutely have to track every single dollar of spending, and they have to forward that to me. So I'm in control of my own grant. And when I come to write the report, I can look back on all the purchasing and find out where the money went, how it was spent, what was purchased, and put that in my report. I received $15,000 for winter clothing from a foundation, and I was able to tell them that we helped 500 people with winter coats to make sure that you don't leave the control of your funding or the controlling of the report to somebody else. And you have to be on top of it from the time you receive the check. Attention to detail for me is absolutely critical. It gets me where I need to be because I'm hopeful that when they receive the report that they'll think, oh, this is pretty good. They'll give me some more money.
Anne-Marie, the attention to detail, perfect. That's great. We love to see it. Anything can easily slip through the cracks, so it's always good to stay on top of it. I would suggest the team is informed of this processes of the grant and essentially the stages of where it's at. We have lost that line of communication because somebody left the team. We didn't know about it until we were trying to get a report from them.
First, one of the things that we really appreciate seeing in the report, the lessons learned section. So we take those lessons and we apply those to support other grantees. And so we'll hear the themes that technology upgrades often take longer than expected and have cost overruns. That helps us when we're talking to a future grantee who's looking to perhaps do something that's similar around a technology update, a database management system, capacity building. We can bring in those lessons that organizations in the same community have gone through. We also use our reports to bring stories to life through the foundation. So we share the reports with our comms team. If we're looking to highlight an initiative, a project, an organization, we go to our reports, we have summaries of them all, and we pull those out for future stories. So they might live through a podcast or through our newsletters or our magazines or show up in a board report. If you have an outstanding report, sometimes the funders, we're not checking in on those, but it may mean that you're not eligible to apply for a future grant. So if your report's outstanding, you might have missed it. It might be on someone else's account. Years may have gone by, and then you go and apply, and now you'll see your grant's been withdrawn. No one likes outstanding reports. They sometimes can just get a little lost.
Yeah, Melissa, they don't just get lost on your online systems. They get lost in our world as well. One thing about continuity that Carolina mentioned is that, we've gone through several financial officers. And Marie, we're lucky that we have people that control all of that. But that was the thing, is that it was like reinventing the wheel. So now we have a system, and our grants are specific. There's event staff, there's artists, there's musicians, there's all of these. It's over $500,000 project, the Flying Canoe Volant. So it's huge. Now I have a system with our new financial officer that all of those things are categorized from the get-go, from the onset. As soon as there's a payment made, it's in the right category. So when it comes time to account for all of those, it's so much easier. So the continuity of team, financial officer, grant writers, and all of that is if possible.
How do you guys decide which grants to actually apply for? What's a good grant in your mind?
I'm constantly seeking grants. We have many tried and true, like CIP, Community Foundation, Travel Alberta, because we're a langue minoritaire, Patrimoine Canada, we're a minority language, so Heritage Canada is very important to us, arts presenting, so there's a lot. Part of my role is this corporate funding, so I think for us, it's the tried and true ones, and then I'm constantly exploring family foundations like Carolina and Melissa mentioned. We go to the tried and trues, the one that we have a track record with, and I suggest to anyone, get your grant in first, get in there, so at least you're a known quantity. I would think that the grant officers would agree with that. Get in there, at least you're on the radar, because they all talk to each other, because there's a real action and a network. There's opportunities there. So it's constantly looking. We go to the tried and trues and exploring other grant opportunities that align with us. But those are the sort of ideas that I have and that we have. And then I also deal with all the corporates as well. That's a different strategy. That's a sponsorship. The same sort of relevance as far as acknowledging the sponsor, the funding group, those all apply. The sponsorship partnerships are different, but it's the same kind of prospect, same kind of alignment. It's a constant effort. It's well worth it.
The deadline's very important. Somebody call me, or if I found a grant today that's due by the end of next week, I think, okay, how much work is this going to be? Can I deliver? Do we have everything that we need to submit with the grant? And if I can't do that, and you can't put together a good grant in a short time frame, I think it's best to leave it for the next round. It doesn't do us any favors if you put in a grant and it's not a good job and then results in not getting the funding. It's a waste of time, and they don't look upon you that well if they remember, oh, we got junked the last time and that sort of thing.
It can be better to miss an application cycle if you're not ready, because if you apply, for the example, through ECF and you're declined, then it's a 6-month wait period. And that essentially is a year is from when it's approved to you can apply again to the community grant, versus if you wait and your projects or initiatives further along, then you can apply in a shorter time. So now you're having to wait a longer time for a project that maybe was rushed to get to it.
Grant writing can take a really long time. I've spent 40 hours on a single project grant before. So I want to know, like, is my investment of 40 hours really going to be worth it? How competitive is it? There was a grant that came out from one of the insurance companies recently that said they have $200,000 and they're looking to only support 4 projects for that $200,000. And the last round, they had 80 applicants apply to it. So I'm like, unless I'm sure that it's really a strong match with what I'm looking for, maybe I don't want to spend my 40 hours on that grant. I also look at, how long does it take to fill in the application? If it's a 10-minute application, then maybe it is worth just like throwing my name in the ring. And then do I have text already written for it? If you already have, like, many of my projects are supported by multiple grants, whether it's a corporate sponsor and then one funder supports for one reason, and then there's a matching request to have funding from federal dollars. There's all these different matches, and you might have already written some of the applications that answer some of those questions in the proposal. So if you can reuse some of that text, then that saves some time.
The question of a lot of organizations is capacity building type of grant needs and project needs. And projects, I come up with a lot of those, and those are lots of fun. And I like to prepare grant applications to organizations that have money for a project. It's tough to get capacity building types of funds because they're kind of not very crystal clear kind of things that you're asking for. But you know that you need funds to be able to deal with various exigencies with operations, the things that come along, and so you have to get somebody to deal with this, but you don't have staff or you don't have somebody who's available to just trigger it, because you then have to find more volunteers. You can get funding that's capacity building that allows you to have some money that doesn't have a specific thing that you have to do, but it helps keep the organization going along. It's trying to find a way to access those types of grants that I find the hardest part for our organization.
It seems to me right now that the grant environment in Alberta and Canada more broadly is really targeted to new project funding grants, and getting operating funds, which for an organization like ours is so critical, is much more difficult.
I don't know what it's like in the environmental grant area, but a lot of our grants, the project types for the festival and all that kind of thing, they include operational funding. So it's all tied in. There's also some arts grants that are specific to assist arts organizations in hiring consultants, hiring extra staff, hiring sort of project-based, those kinds of other assets, so to speak. We haven't really gone after any kind of the infrastructure grants in that for arts entities. So a lot of our grants for Flying Canoe, and it's a huge festival with heavy costs, are operational and staffing, event contract and all that. That's all included in that kind of grant. We want to make sure that the established festivals, we get 100,000 people in 4 nights. They want to make sure that those festivals are sustainable.
I think it's like knowing the different types of grant maker. Public grant maker, so government, might be different and might be falling into some of those boxes you're talking about. And then foundations or community foundations or family foundations. Other type of grant making bodies might be more flexible or quicker to adapt their grant making practices. Behind the scenes, right, grant makers are all we have networks with each other's conversations, conferences, best practices on the funding landscape. And we're looking at grant making even like all around North America, Europe, like what are these best practices? So we hear over and over again, right? Like we want multi-year funding and we want operating dollars so that we can get the work done. Grant makers are hearing this and internalizing, like, how do we set up intelligent granting programs that can help volumes of applications come through? So something that you might see is that a grant might be operational focused, but then it will be very narrow. It might not fit the nature of your organization. Edmonton Community Foundation, we have very narrow focused environmental operating grants. And we're able to do the operating grants, which are only for charities about Wetaskiwin area north that are an environmental focus and located in that region, because the landscape around eligible organizations that can apply is limited. So it does give us more opportunity to help have these more open granting guidelines around operating costs. And then through our community grant program, we are quite broad in what we will fund. So it would be capacity building or projects or renovations and equipment. And we are actually being a bit more cautious, and we're encouraging grantees to really reflect on new programs. There's lots of gaps in available funding right now. So it's if you are proposing a new project, what is that plan to sustain that after the ECF funding?
What should you do if your organization realizes it cannot deliver on what it's contracted to do in the grant? Got your grant, you're moving along, but you're not going to meet your goal.
Definitely let us know. That line of communication is critical. I think there's a few different avenues that you can take, and it very much depends on the type of grant and the foundation that or funder that you're working with. For us, like after you let us know, it's sort of how can we pivot in a way that you can still make use of those grant funds. So for example, if a partner falls through or a critical component falls through, who in our network can sort of take on that work and like we can still kind of complete the grant. Can organization itself sort of complete the project on their own? We're essentially still trying to get that project to the very end, and even if it needs extensions, just we can definitely troubleshoot as long as you let us know. There's a problem and you don't let us know, and we're sort of in the blank, and then you wait till the last minute to let us know that your deadlines is there and nothing has gotten done. It's unfortunate. Like it becomes a little bit tougher to troubleshoot.
Echoing that, both ECF and EcoTrust, we are really in that mindset of being partners with organizations, right? Reaching out to us, talking about your grant idea, reaching out to collect feedback if your grant wasn't successful, reaching out when you start to see that you might need some changes to your deadline or your project. Also knowing, or your initiative, also knowing what are the terms up front. So from ECF's perspective, we'll say a 10% change in budget, connect with us. So what is the grant maker's terms around changes to the grant itself? Don't let the report be that first point of contact where we hear about the change, because now we have a report and we have to go backwards, just like Carolina said in that pivot. Grant makers, right, we're reading hundreds of applications. We're really current on what's going on in community. So we know that it's very challenging that these changes can happen. So we really want to work with you to find the most successful way forward in the scope of the project.
For nonprofit board members, what are the potential risks associated with a grant that they need to be aware of and mitigate?
Dave here, looking at the sorts of things that I run into, and quite often we end up having to try and track down was responsible for what. Dealing with volunteers, you get quite often people just have to kind of trust that they've gone ahead and done what they were able to do and what you tasked them to do, and then when you come back to take a look, you realize, oh, that's not been accomplished. But we have done some similar parts that fit the bill and accomplish what we were trying to go for. So you need to be creative with looking at what you're doing as part of your operations, and find ways to make sure that you get some value out of it that you think reflects the expectations of the grantor are all about. The other thing is somebody mentioned about having multiple financial officers. That's a big problem for a lot of organizations, and we've had difficulties over the years because the financial expectations out there are getting to be so complicated, and some of us are not financial experts, and so we struggle to be able to make sure that we have done everything that we need to in order to be fiscally accountable. But that can be difficult if you're a volunteer and you're not really a bookkeeper. So we've had to find ways to link up with other organizations, and this is one tip that I'll throw out there. Working with other organizations to share resources is really important, and we try to do that as much as we can, and finding the other organizations that have got flexible enough arrangements that we can do that.
Granting agency, how do you know you've made the best decision on the use of funds?
Well, one of the things is that we have a beautiful committee of volunteers that help support the final decision making. Well, it's never one person making decisions. Through our grant programs, they're holistically reviewed. So we're really looking to understand fit in the community, the need, and then our reviewers have the really hard job of doing the final push through of the ones that are successful at that time. And then we still know that things can change. So you could have amazing project that's funded, and then the staff person moves on and it needs to pivot. I think there's never perfect. I think we're all working together to really be partners and try to fund the good work. All the organizations are doing amazing work.
I mean, I think I talked a little bit about measurable environmental outcomes, which is great to have for sure, but it's good to see when projects fill a gap and when the community kind of agrees together that it's a needed project, and it, like, the learnings really come out and shine through. Both measurable and non-quantifiable, I guess, aspects are great.
You get this warm, fuzzy feeling that you just know it's a good project. There's definitely a little bit of non-quantifiable. Sitting on the committee, by the time we get the applications, EcoTrust has gone through already a whole bunch of different processes. Applications that we get are already really good. So it is hard to make a decision, but I always tell myself there's no bad project here. Can't support them all. And I think that's the hard part. Just really trying to pick the ones the most impactful. And then when you see them come full circle, like whether it's a year-long project or 2 years long project, and you see those ultimate results come, a lot of satisfaction that comes from knowing like you supported that project, it's completed all its goals and deliverables, and then you hope that they apply again. And then you do build this like trust and this understanding, not bias the process at all, but it is just good to see good work continue over the years.